I'm Saraya Wintersmith. Tonight on Greater Boston, is the media missing the mark in its coverage of the pro-Palestine protests on college campuses? Journalism professor Danielle Brown argues the focus has been on the spectacle, not the substance. She joins me ahead. Plus, one woman shares her story of fleeing Taliban-ruled Afghanistan to start over in the U.S. And what does the beef between Kendrick Lamar and Drake tell us about our love for celebrity drama? The pro-Palestine campus protests have gotten wall-to-wall coverage from news outlets across the country, including GBH. Journalists have reported story after story about the encampments, clashes with administrators, counter-protesters, and police who've arrested hundreds of students nationwide. But my next guest argues the coverage is focusing on the wrong things. Michigan State University journalism professor Danielle K. Brown wrote in The Conversation, quote, "To the media, some elements are more newsworthy than others, with confrontation and spectacle often topping the list." She joins me now. Professor Brown, thank you so much for being available.
It's a pleasure to be with you today. Thanks for having me.
Of course. You have a body of work that focuses on activism and social movements and identity. Is that what prompted you to write this piece right now?
Yes, yes. A lot of my work has focused on the increase of protest activity over the last decade and how it's been portrayed in media coverage. And as the protests on college campuses around the United States have ramped up and continued over the past 6 months, I felt like it was really important to write an article that helped people understand why they weren't seeing the whole story and how that sort of trend plays out across protests over time.
You wrote protest movements can look very different depending on where you stand, both literally and figuratively. And then you go on to say, if you're outside the protest, you really are relying on the media to get the story right and inform you. What does an audience miss when we in the media elect to cover the drama of disruption, as you wrote, without getting to the underlying reasons for a given protest?
Right. So most audiences only see protests when they happen at this big sort of pinnacle point where people are disrupting things and things are very different. Business as usual is not the politics protests are really under. And so you miss a lot of times, especially as an audience member, the opportunity to understand and see the planning process of a protest, the substance of a protest, why a collective of people decided to organize a list of demands or talk to a particular institution. You miss the regular politics, the business as usual part of the politics that typically happen before protests. And so when the media chooses to only cover or initially cover the breaking news of a protest that focuses only on the actions that are happening on a particular day, the general public can't know everything that's happening behind the scenes. We find time and time again, since 2016 all the way through 2023 in various surveys, that only about 5 to 10% of any given population is actually disrupted by a protest, which leaves about 90 to 95% of us relying on someone else to tell us what is really going on. And more often than not, it's the news media that helps people understand what protests are all about.
Were there any specific examples we can learn from that disregarded substance in the case of students looking to shape the conversation around Israel and Hamas and the conflict there?
So a lot of the coverage for the first week and 10 days of national media coverage and local media coverage of these protests on or across campuses, but also on the major broadcast networks, a lot of that coverage is focusing on arrests, chaos, campus crackdowns. There's a love for the letter C, and just the chaos, right? And by doing that, they begin to emphasize the number of arrests. They emphasize the police reports. Sometimes there will be a small paragraph, maybe 1 or 2 sentences that includes information about what the protesters are doing. Usually it's a sentence that says something along the lines of they're encouraging their university to divest, in particular financial stakes, but that's it. And so when people see like an overwhelming amount of information about arrests and chaos and crackdowns, and then have these confrontations that are pictured front and center on pictures. That's really what they tend to walk away with. When more of the narrative focuses on those types of, and leads with, especially in the headlines, those types of words and themes, that's what people are able to take away with most often than not.
I think relatedly, you're also doing work to sort of bridge the gap between media outlets and Black communities that may have some distrust of media because of patterns of misrepresentation. And there's a long history of that before DEIA became trendy in news. But what has your research found about news outlets that get it right when it comes to coverage of protests and social movements? And are any of those insights applicable in this case with campus protests?
Sure. We have found time and time again that community media, media that is immersed in a community, media that is sometimes called alternative media, but that really focuses on a particular group of people that have been underrepresented, not just in Black communities, but particularly in Black communities in my research, that they tend to be able to get it right more quickly than the mainstream news media is able to get it right. And when I say get it right, I mean more fully portray protesters and their substance. They are able to do that a lot quicker. We also find that it's not just an alternative media space. There are individuals inside the mainstream newsrooms that are also embedded in those communities that are able to craft narratives and that are more holistic and then are more representative of a particular group of people. So in my research, we found that some of the most trusted messengers in Black communities are Black journalists. And many of those Black journalists actually happen to be embedded in the very mainstream news organizations that are not typically named as the most trusted sources of news. And so in our research, our team is working really hard to try to figure out how to leverage these trusted messengers and better inform both communities, but also newsrooms about how to get the information they need to create a more holistic narrative quickly.
It sounds like there is some power in assembling a diverse news team. Switching gears a little bit, your piece touches on how official narratives can come to dominate coverage and sort of contribute to a lack of understanding. I'm curious whether you think some of that imbalance is just an inevitable function of who sits where. Like if an elected official who entered office through a major election, a governor, a member of Congress, says anything about protests, I think because of how they came into office, we in the media do tend to latch on to whatever they say. What are your thoughts about that imbalance?
Yeah, journalists, they have a hard time with this. And I did too when I was a journalist. Official sources we have relationships with them as journalists. We've talked to them before. More than likely, they list official statements. When they provide quotes, there is no legal consequence for us repeating them. And so official sources rule almost all of the initial coverage of anything, of breaking news. And it's hard to get away from that, especially in the initial days of any particular event. And so what we have is just a challenge of how do you balance knowing that our official sources, especially our government officials, the university officials, they have a press team that is putting out a narrative and information quickly. It's hard to meticulously vet. And one of the functions of journalism is not just to provide holistic coverage, it's also to provide breaking news so people understand what's going on, the first draft of history, as well as the second, third, and fourth, if you will. And so the official narratives it is part of the journalism's routine, but it is also it creates a complicated space for journalists to work within, especially when we talk about the protest paradigm, because what we know to be true is that many of the narratives that delegitimize protesters and social movements are created by the sourcing structure that happens within any particular story. And that is because we rely on those official narratives. So we have a lot of work to do in terms of imagining our information sourcing networks, in terms of imagining what could be an official source when a particular group or entity is involved. But certainly the traditional and current function of how journalism is produced is to lean towards official sources, and those do not always have the intentions of holistically representing the people that are there in that community.
I want to turn to public responsibility now, or if you think that there is a public responsibility. And to be fair, time and resources in the industry are sort of limited, and in a large part, what we cover and how we cover it is driven by the fact that audiences do respond, and that sort of plays into the money making of our industry. How do we, like the larger we, society, deal with that reality? And what role does the public have in pushing us to explore more nuanced coverage?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the public has to be willing to, speak with and talk to journalists. I think they have to be willing to read journalism. I think the audiences need to be more cognizant of what they share and how they share information. And I think that, over time, especially when events like this evolve, we really need audiences and communities and individuals to be invested in keeping up with a topic as it evolves over time, and really understanding that, like, the breaking news is information that's vital and important, but it's not the whole story. And a more complete and robust understanding of any particular issue will only happen if you're willing to think about news as a package of information, and not that one news story can really inform an entire audience of any particular issue or topic.
Lastly, and quickly if you can, because you lift up the old newsroom adage, if it bleeds, it leads. That's the way folks have come to understand how we decide what we cover. It's a good whittling alternative. What would you suggest for newsrooms who are trying to move towards more sharper, nuanced, more informative work?
Well, what I found, especially I was on the ground in Minneapolis after George Floyd was murdered, and what we found when we started tracking sort of social media engagement with particular articles is that there is a lot of engagement with really robust coverage, right? If it bleeds, it leads might work in some scenarios, but also if it's substantive and it gives you this human approach to understanding the nuance of a human being or a group of human beings or an idea, it also creates quite a bit of engagement with audiences. So it doesn't necessarily have to bleed. We don't have to partake in the arrangement of news values as we do. There is evidence that more holistic coverage will also share and be engaging for your audiences, even if it doesn't have smoke and fires on the front page.
Professor Danielle Brown, thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
No matter what we like to tell ourselves, pretty much everybody loves drama. And right now, the feud between Kendrick Lamar and Drake is a whole lot of drama, with millions following along as the rappers trade insults and accusations back and forth. Now add on Will Smith and Chris Rock, Kanye, Kim, and Taylor Swift, and many, many more, and it's clear we just can't get enough of these celebrity beefs. That goes for Callie Crossley, who joins me now, my favorite culture critic and yours. Callie, what's good, what's going on, and whose side are you on?
What's great about the Kendrick Lamar and Drake beef for me, and it is a beef, not a battle or a feud, if you want to be hip, is that I don't really have a dog in this fight. I'm just fascinated by it because it just keeps getting uglier and uglier and uglier. And I don't know why, since at the outset of their relationship, Drake put him on his records, he was promoting Kendrick, saying, hey, this guy is a genius, pay attention to him, and it went wrong really fast. And when it went wrong, then both of them have used their skills to come at each other. And so we've seen some rap masters at work, so that's been interesting. And I don't see how they turn around so fast.
So you're J. Cole in this situation, and you're neutral, you're tapped out.
I'm trying to tap out. Well, one thing, Kendrick did call J. Cole and Drake out, saying, don't talk about how y'all are the big two, because it's just me. So I got some of the quotes from some of the dissing and redissing, is what I like to call it.
With this feud, it's one that President Obama once weighed in on in 2016. That was before the most recent set of exchanges. And Callie, I'm a lover, not a fighter. But without evaluating any of what has been said in the songs, to your point, Kendrick did like a double track drop, which prompts a lot of questions for me, like, was it ready beforehand? And what was the writing process? And did he do it all once in the studio? Did it prompt any questions for you?
Well, the only question it prompted for me is, wow, he can turn it around pretty quick. It felt like it wasn't prepared before, that he just wanted to one-up him. And it takes Drake so far a little longer to respond. But, some of the disses are really, they're calling each other real bad names now at this point. It's not even I say we like those kind of fun beefs, where they kind of go at each other, but the real nastiness, it gets a little uncomfortable, at least for me.
I think I agree. It's hard because we like the genre sometimes, but it does involve a lot of bravado and showiness and commanding of respect. And with the rise of lady rappers, we see them getting in the action too.
Yeah, well, Cardi B and Nicki Minaj. Now, I think that's all about Nicki Minaj being mad because Cardi B sort of took up a little space that wasn't ready for her to take up.
She definitely did.
So instead of sort of embracing her in it and maybe, being phony about it if she needed to, she just did the serious diss and, wanted to let her know, hey, I am still the queen here. And I get that to some degree. And again, that's not one I had. I like Cardi B. I didn't have a real dog in the fight. The one that I had a dog in the fight for is Kim Cattrall and Sarah Jessica Parker.
Okay.
Because I like Sex and the City, and I wanted all of them to be there. And I missed her when she wasn't there. And they created that little scene for her to be in without Sarah Jessica Parker, because the beef continues.
Right.
But I'd love to see that sort of get resolved. But what the shrinks say about us being involved in this, which is why I got interested in it, is that we like to think that celebrities are a little bit above us. And then when they fall down on this, then we can say, oh, but they're just like us. And we like that too, for some weird reason. We want them to show the kind of vulnerabilities and the messiness that we know is a part of our lives. So we become fascinated. It's like sort of like driving by a car wreck. Let me see what happened, but I don't have to be in it, but I just want to see what's happening. And it becomes more important to us, so the shrinks say, if we have a dog in the fight. So if you like Kendrick better than Drake, if you like Kim better than Sarah Jessica Parker, Cardi better than Nicki, then it becomes more important to you. And sometimes you take on that persona of the person that is in the beef.
I just want to revisit the Kendrick and Drake thing. I'd like to think that rap beefs are a little bit better, only because you can examine sort of the artistry of their tracks.
Good point.
But with Sarah Jessica Parker and Kim Cattrall, yeah, we like to think about celebrities and feelings and them showing feelings, despite the fact that they have more money and we're kind of thinking about them as above us.
I know.
All of the resentment and the ego and commanding of respect, it becomes real.
Well, with this particular rap beef between Kendrick and Drake, some people are saying, is this a commercial thing where everybody gets paid at the end? Because what has happened is both of their records, all of their songs have gone up because people are wanting to check out what they're saying to each other on the disses and then on the regular stuff. So it's been a boon to both of them in the pocket. So who knows whether or not after they got going, they thought, well, I'll just keep it going because it's money for me.
Can I just tell you, I think that my favorite part about all of it is embodied in a tweet from Naima Cochran, who basically said, Black Twitter got a little bit of its heyday back in line, because if you went to sleep and then you woke up, you might have missed something. And then you got on and you were trying to track the beef through what people were saying, and it made me miss when Twitter was Twitter, now X.
Well, it's gotten big enough so that Nichelle, who is the host of Entertainment Tonight, was closing out the other day, and she said, I got to go home and see if there's something new in the beef. So there's something to be said for the immediacy of the beef going on and on and on. And who knows how long it'll keep going.
We don't like to be invested, but we're secretly invested. Kelly Crossley, thanks so much.
Thank you, sir.
Finally tonight, you don't have to be a knight in shining armor to embark on a quest, but you do need a dream, some courage, and a little luck. That's something Zalaiha Waheed learned when she fled Taliban-ruled Afghanistan to rebuild her life in the U.S. She recounts her journey on Stories from the Stage. We bring you that now as part of a partnership between that show and this one.
I have never met my grandfather, but growing up in Afghanistan, I remember listening to stories about his passion to medicine and how an amazing doctor he was. He was very famous for having a good hand and making his patients feel comfortable despite the limited medical equipment and resources. When I was at grade 11, I had this amazing English teacher. She was the kind of person who was able to tell you how good you are. One day she said to me, I'm seeing a wonderful doctor in your face. At that time, it kind of struck me, and I was like, what does it mean to have the face of a doctor? Could she see my grandfather in my face? But in another way, it really encouraged me. And from then on, I decided to become a doctor. I was born in 2001, the same year that Taliban left the government in Afghanistan. With them being out of power, this means that I grew up in an era where girls were able to get an education. Although the security situation of Afghanistan was never completely stable, there were often events of suicide bombers and attacks, and there were never enough surgeons to care for patients and the injured ones. And there were never enough women doctors. I remember telling my mom, I want to help. 2 years later, on 2020, I'm a first-year medical student at Kabul University of Medical Sciences. I'm one of the 70 women among 150 classmates in my class. This is an amazing time for me and for my family, and we are seeing a good future for myself. I love the studying, going to cafes, and attending labs, until the Taliban attacked our university on November of 2020. I was at school that day, and I heard the explosion and the screaming of the students. Our teacher told us to run. Because our campus was surrounded with the large walls, we had to climb the ladders over the razor wire to jump to safety. It was the scariest moment of my life. This event frightened my family, and they asked me that I have to apply for a scholarship to go outside the country and continue my medical studies, since the Taliban are being known for preventing girls from going to school and forcing them into marriages. I told my family I would apply just to make them feel happy. However, in my mind, we are living in the 21st century. This will never happen. We have freedom in Afghanistan, despite the attacks. But I was wrong that day. On August 15, 2021, we learned that the Taliban took over the government. My father, who worked with the United Nations for almost 20 years, which put him at risk. Earlier that evening, a cousin who lived near the airport has told us about the evacuation flights. My dad and my brother went to investigate. When it seemed possible, my dad sent my brother home to get us. Honestly, leaving Afghanistan seemed so impossible. I didn't even pack a bag, and my mother, who was 8 months pregnant, stayed behind. She said it would be difficult in her condition to travel, but I think she didn't believe we would actually get out. If we had known, I would have begged my mom to come, but everything was happening so quickly. I remember my body being pushed onto the flight with hundreds of other people. 2 weeks later, we arrived in the United States, in Virginia, at a military base. This is my first time traveling out of Afghanistan. At registration, they put a bracelet with our names around our wrists, and at this point, the officers told us that we cannot stay together since man and woman are being segregated. I look at my father and I realize I have never been alone without my family. As my father and I say goodbye, both of us start crying. I'm assigned to live in a big hall of 70 other women and children, mostly from rural areas of Afghanistan and more conservative families. I feel alone. I feel alone because I'm the only single woman in the room, and I'm not fluent in their language, which was Pashto language. For the first week, I'm sitting in my bunk bed, crying all the time, not eating food, and I can only see my dad and my brother outside during the day. There is no good internet connection to reach my mom. I felt like everything that I had worked for is ending. However, I tried to not give up on my dream of becoming a doctor, even though I didn't know how it would be possible. I learned that there were medical tents in the base where staff were treating patients. One day, I went there and I asked, can I volunteer as an interpreter? I told them I can speak English, and they said to me, sorry, we don't need your help. We have interpreters. And I kept going back because that was the only thing in my power that I could do at that time. I wanted to learn about the United States medical system. Eventually, they let me help, and I start asking questions about what does it look like to become a doctor in the United States, and they would tell me about their journeys. This made me very hopeful again. Working at the tents also helped me to get up from my bed and to not be overwhelmed all the time by the anxiety and stress of what I left behind. 4 months later, we moved to Massachusetts. And this is the time when everything starts to get real. As we start to build a new life from scratch, whereas we were provided shelter in the base, and everything is very expensive. I also started to worry about my dream of becoming a doctor. Some people say to me, you have to give up on your dream. Medical school is very expensive in the United States. But my father tells me to not give up on your dream. He said he would work 2 or 3 jobs if he has to support me to get back into medical school. So from there, I decided no matter how many challenges I faced and I will face, I will become a doctor somehow. I want to make my father proud and my mother, who said to me, you must go to the airport. And I also want to honor all the female classmates who were unable to get out of Afghanistan, and now they are stuck at home and they cannot continue their education. I want to give women hope everywhere. Thank you.
You can catch more stories from the stage Mondays at 9:30 p.m. on World and Fridays at 8 here on GBH2, or anytime on the Stories from the Stage Facebook page and YouTube channel. And you can catch some LGBTQ+ stories from the stage live at the show's Pride event tomorrow night. For tickets and more info, head to gbh.org/events. And we're offering free tickets for a limited number of people with the code PRIDE in all caps. That's it for tonight. We'll be back tomorrow. Thanks for watching. I'm Soraya Wintersmith. Good night.